Deputy Commissioner Sigal, Director of the Operations Divisions at the Israel Police, for an interview on Homeland Security and governance in Israel. And this interview will be conducted by Lior Akerman, Senior Fellow. Lior, you're here. From the Institute for Policy and Strategy at the Reichman University. Lior, please. I think that the subject of Homeland Security is something we deal with at the highest level. Every government needs to address various challenges. We're talking about the police, its limitations and capabilities, and if we're talking about the level of crime and terrorist attacks, this is something we are constantly addressing. The IPS, the Institute for Policy and Strategy, thought, and we thought together, that perhaps the issue of Homeland Security merits a panel, not just a panel at the Herzliya conference, by the way, but as a field of specialization and truly researching and understanding the capabilities, the limitations, and the right measures that need to be taken in order to improve the situation in Israel. So we thought that we should hold this panel, since the issue of the Israelis' Homeland Security is a very important element in the national resilience of a country, especially a country like Israel, with everything it's been through. And national resilience is a central pillar in the national security of Israel's. And therefore, the need to talk about it. I mean, there is no ability to carry out a normal routine in a country without having governance, a rule of law, policing, law enforcement, and to provide minimal personal safety to Israelis. I'd like to present some data as an introduction. It probably won't be news for you, Sigal. You're probably dealing with these matters on a daily basis, but you can see the data. Of course, I'm not going to read this. On the one hand, the recruitment goals of the Israel police vis-a-vis the number of positions it already has and the inability to recruit, and on the other hand, how many police officers have left it. And this points at the inability of the police to recruit vis-a-vis the missions that are too much for the police. And we just heard the police commissioner yesterday who said the police can't handle all of its missions. It's too small for it. We know that. I think Israeli citizens feel that. I'm not sure that the decisions maker understand how severe the situation is, because things haven't changed for so many years. We hear about additional budgets and additional openings, but it's not always translated to the level of the individual police officer, but we'll hear more about it in the interview. Please note the following data. This is data from the Israel Police for the end of 2022. This is the number of police officers, but there are significant staffing gaps. Look at the number of police officers in Israel per capita in comparison to other countries. We only brought here two examples, but in most Western countries, in the vast majority, the situation is much better, and we see much greater presence of police officers than you see in Israel. And this is from documents of the Israeli police, and the difficulty to recruit, and then the difficulty to retain personnel within the police, and of course the burnout and the terrible wage conditions and the lack of professional and legal backing. And before we talk, I'd like to show a slide, data from slide will show in the concluding panel that has to do with internal security. We did it 2 weeks ago along with a panel among Israeli citizens. Representative sample the sense of personal safety. To what extent do Israeli citizens feel a sense of personal safety? 47%. That's almost 50% of all Israeli citizens don't feel a sufficient personal safety. That means the level of safety they feel is medium and below. And some of the topics that were mentioned as factors that cause this feeling is, first of all, the understanding that the police is too weak to tackle all of its assignments. And you see lack of presence of police officers, many terror attacks, many violent incidents and crimes, with an emphasis on the situation in the Arab community. I can also mention some data from poll that was presented in another panel today in the Arab sector, where almost 62% of the Arab citizens don't feel personal safety in the Arab sector because of the increasing violence in the Arab sector. So these are the results of the poll. They talk about the bullying behavior of citizens with an emphasis on the situation in the roads in Israel, but also in general. So after having presented this sad or difficult data, since you've already been introduced, now I'd like to ask you a few questions, and later on we're also going to speak with former police commissioners. We'll introduce them and speak with them. But my first question, Sigal, I'd like you to comment on this information. You're probably very much familiar with this data. You also need to cope with it daily, and how does that impact the ability of the police to deliver all its assignments, and what's required, what needs to happen for things to change in today's current reality? Well, first of all, what's required is something that what you more or less did here, and that is to just state out very clearly that we are facing a problem, that internal security does not receive sufficient attention from the media, from the public, from the government. I think there's an entire leg or pillar missing in national security, and that leg is internal security. People are indifferent about it until it reaches very difficult places. For example, the extreme shortage we have of personnel, of manpower. Over the years, the police has weakened. I think that this is something people are beginning to realize, and I think it's one of the expressions of domestic safety and personal safety, because a weakened police means a society that cannot function sufficiently, that the social order is at the brink of an abyss. It's very difficult to say this, but this is reality. It's important to see it at face value. And the issue of personal safety is a true problem. We keep talking about it. The numbers you presented talk about 30 positions, 33,000. It already means that there aren't enough police officers, and such a great shortage of police officers only, beat cops, people who need to answer calls when somebody's making a phone call to the police and you need to send a police car. That we're already we have a shortage of about 700 police officers. It means we cannot provide sufficient and quick enough response, and that's when things are problematic and not good. Our struggle, I think, is also pretty well known, and our minister, and I hope that his struggle will bear fruit, and hopefully we will manage to provide salaries that are more respectful of this difficult and dangerous profession. But the police is feeling burnout in other areas as well. The restrictions on enforcement. This is something that we feel over time more and more. It's not something that just happened over the past year or two. I think that we can say that it's been going on for more than 10 years, but in the past we had broader authorities, but more and more things are getting lost and taken away from us. We wake up on a Sunday morning and report on a number of homicides, shooting incidents, stabbings, etc., etc. And that's just on that criminal aspect, without speaking about public order and the protests and terrorist attacks that are constantly happening. And you're saying, okay, and now I have 2,000 less police officers. How can we respond when enforcement is limited, when there are new rules and regulations constantly coming up, and the balance between civil and human rights and the state's ability to truly fight its illnesses is sometimes being breached in our view, and it's very, very difficult to create this thing with our arms and legs tied behind our backs. And there are other issues related, loss of trust in the government, finding alternatives, entire communities, entire sectors that are producing their own law enforcement systems, not just of their law, but of their conflict resolution and judicial processes that are not at the place we would like to see, such places of conflict resolution, for example. And in other areas, the economy, an alternate economy, there are entire places where people don't open up a bank account. They go elsewhere to dark, bad, harsh places sometimes because they have no choice. A young person in Israel who cannot open a bank account ultimately needs to do something about it. And the things that these people specifically opt for, it makes it very difficult for enforcement, and it's a complex reality. You need to understand it, to analyze it, to study it, and to do whatever we can for these numbers that you just showed us on personal safety will somehow change for the better. So in this context, I'd like to ask a question, and this question is made up of two parts. First of all, we talked about the current situation. What do you project? Which future challenges do you foresee in the near future for the Israeli police? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, what are the practical measures that the State of Israel, the Israeli government, the Israeli police needs to carry out for the situation to be any different? Okay, let me put it this way, and I'll start from your second question. We are witnessing the fact that one of the chains of the Israeli society, one of the links, has collapsed, has imploded. The weakening of the order in the Arab street has led to a situation in which it's a horrific situation. You presented over 60% that don't feel confidence, don't feel personal safety. That's an understatement. I don't think it accurately represents the situation. The Arab street is broken. They're exhausted in view of this situation that the organizations, the crime organizations, control this sector. And if something happens to you, you need to go to these crime organizations and not to the authorities. That means loss of trust in all manifestations of the establishment, including the police. And I believe that we have to declare an emergency state. The number of murders that keep shocking us, and rightfully so, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's just a byproduct, and behind that there's a very big market of a lot of money. Sometimes these are state funds, tenders that go to criminal organizations, entire industries of fictitious invoices, and money that's going to the worst possible places. That's a state of emergency. If we're talking about the homicides, and the Homicide Express, that it's an emergency state. We need to convene all government ministries and to come up with a plan that will be sufficiently aggressive and adamant and strong in order to save most of these people who are living under terrorism. If we don't join arms in such a way, and the previous Deputy Minister Yoav Segalovich started doing it, and he was successful, but without that we won't succeed. We're working on it. The minister is really into this. We are doing situation estimates around the clock regarding the crime situation in the Arab street, and hopefully we'll head in this direction to expect that if we bring more soldiers and more armed forces into that place and expect this to solve the problem, I think it's very superficial and it's also misguided. You know, in this context, if you've already mentioned the crime rates in the Arab sector, and it's definitely very obvious, and we can see it in the polls in the Arab sector, but also the effect it has on the Jewish population. I mean, the Israel police did come up with programs in the past to combat crime. They established a division with superintendent, and it's on the rise, and the State of Israel came up with a plan. We know the Safe Track plan of Deputy Minister Segalovich. Does it still exist? Is it still active? Is the Israeli police trying to suggest or to recommend or to implement a different program, a national program for addressing crime in the Arab sector? The answer is yes, it does exist. It's a bit different. Yoav Segalovich is no longer with us, so he's not leading it, and it still exists. We still receive almost daily reports on how it's progressing, and we need to organize ourselves in a stronger way. And I think there's one mistake that's conceivable in this division for thwarting crime. The title doesn't really represent what it includes. The intention was to have more community collaborations, to build more police stations, to recruit Arab police officers. That's very important. We're the police, we're not the military. We're supposed to represent the population in which we work, and that's why this division was established. People have complaints because maybe there's a certain mix-up here, but working on crime in the Arab street, it doesn't belong to this division. It belongs to all the districts and to the entire division for investigations and intel. Yes, we don't have enough personnel. It's important to understand that these people carry out all the missions. If there's a hot early warning about terrorist attacks, we need to send the investigators. If there's a large demonstration or a gay pride parade that lasts 3 days, it's something very happy, and the police needs to secure this. And it's the same police officers who carry out all these assignments. We need to understand that in the police. My colleagues and myself, we always like to introduce ourselves as a strong police force, and we're heroes, and we burn the midnight oil, working day and night. We work really hard and doing everything we can. It's all that is true, but it's not enough, and we're no longer a strong police, and it's important that we say that. Yes, that's true. One of the topics that was important for us to bring up, the fact that the Israeli police works around the clock, and it's the same police officers who are on the same shifts. And in this context, I'd like to ask you about the National Guard initiative that came up, and there are all kinds of different proposals submitted to the minister. Some of them came from the police itself. What do you think about this initiative to establish a National Guard? If at all, should we have such a National Guard? And if so, what should it look like, and what are the authorities and restrictions it should have? Look, the establishment of another organization in the security establishment that addresses domestic safety is a must. Somewhere in the 70s, the issue of terrorism came under the responsibility of the Israel police. There is no other police force in the world that deals with that. A police officer who's trained to deal with crimes, with criminal activities, needs to also know how to deal with a situation with a terrorist, a life-risking situation, to know how to respond in an efficient and good manner, more than a soldier. And we need to understand that this is very, very difficult. This stark transition. Police force is nothing like the military. You know, people constantly tend to compare between the military and the police in many other areas. But if we talk about our classic activities, a good police force is a police force that understands the complexity of the street that the population it works with represents a lot of complexities, and you need to have common sense and patience and a lot of skills that a police officer needs, and a soldier is not required of a soldier. And then when it's a terrorist, it's something else. It's black or white. It's friend or foe. And in a matter of seconds, you need to change yourself from a big brother who's here to protect the weak or save somebody who's been injured or hurt into a soldier who needs to respond to such situations. I think it's abnormal. In this country, in our reality, we just need another organization. There's this missing square. There's a security that's all about the borders and what's happening outside the country. We have a good police force that could do a better job, and there is internal security, which is something that's added to our job. Whenever there's an early warning, we need to drop everything and look for a terrorist, and I don't think it should work like that, so we need a National Guard. And where should it be placed, and how, and in which form? Look, I think it needs to be on the existing infrastructure of the border police. It needs, of course, to have a very close collaboration with the police. It needs to be beneath the police. I don't see how you can create an infrastructure which is parallel to us. I think there's a certain blurring and we're witnessing this more and more over time between the crime, the areas of crime and terrorism, and there's a very weak strata. It doesn't matter if it's Jews or Arabs, where there's where there's such great poverty, and that's very fertile ground for religiosity, for nationalism, and right now we cannot separate this. The boundaries that we create lead to our failure. When I say that an Arab Muslim attacked a person on the train in Jerusalem and beat that person up, and I need to immediately see if it's criminal or a terrorist act to know if we need to handle this or the ISA needs to. This is not the proper way for things to work. We need to resolve this. And of course, we need legislation for such a National Guard and authorities and a lot of backing. But I think it's really necessary, not just for the police, it's something much needed in Israel. The issue of terrorism activities, it's just some added burden to the police. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you two final questions to conclude this interview. The Israel police is placed in a very sensitive place. In contrast to the ISA and the Mossad, its activities is completely exposed to anyone, to the media, everywhere. And of course, it's held accountable to the public. And on the other hand, it also has a relationship with the political echelon, and that bears with it certain sensitivities. How do you see this being conducted? Look, I know that there's always complexity in the relations between the political echelon and those who carry out, and the operative echelon. I think over the years nobody really clearly defined this, and maybe it's impossible, but it's far from being resolved. The difference between policy definition or policy dictating or dictating operational activities and things that the political echelon is not supposed to be involved in. I think the order should be such that operational activity should be planned within the those who execute, and they need to submit to the political echelon all the different options and the prices, the price tag of each activity, and the political echelon needs to understand that it's their responsibility, or rather accountability. Once the political echelon understand what is the price for every possible course of action, with every plan we come up with, they will know exactly how to direct us to the place where they think the policy should be. And they need to take into account that the prices that will have to be paid are under its responsibility. For example, if, God forbid, there will be another event like Guardian of the Walls with the existing size of our police force, the risk that we will have to use live fire or more power, the chances are much greater because we don't have sufficient personnel. Then you need to use more force, and this responsibility should be placed on the political echelon. Thank you very much, Sigal. I'd like to say, this hasn't been said here, you were the first woman who served as a police station commander, district commander. You're a trailblazer in the Israeli police. You're the first woman to head the operations division. And to conclude this interview, we would like to wish you the best of luck in dealing with the tremendous challenges that are on your shoulders, almost impossible challenges in managing the police. And I wish for all of us that you'll succeed in your position, and then later on in the police. And enough said about that. Amen.